We're now ready for our next step. We went ahead and purchased some 5/8 inch drywall, which matches the existing drywall. Now we're going to go ahead and get the size of our opening, figure out where our cans are placed, go down in the garage, cut that piece out, and throw it up. We are building entertainment. What's up, Flo? We are building entertainment. Okay, with your blue painter's tape and a tape measure, go ahead and measure out the length and the width of your opening. Then pick a specific corner and make your measurements for the cans off of that corner. Get the inside and outside of each can, and what we'll do is we'll box that out, find our center, and draw out our circle downstairs. Same thing with the other side. Go ahead and measure out the length and the width. Write it on your blue painter's tape. Then, off of a specific corner, measure out the distance, the inside and outside of each can. And then we'll go ahead, take it downstairs, box out those measurements, find our center, and draw out our circle. And always remember to measure twice and cut once. To cut your drywall, go ahead and lay it on its side onto a couple pieces of wood. This will make it easier to make your measurements, your marks, to snap your chalk line, and to score the front. After you score the front, snap the back, and then cut the back up along the crease. What we're going to do is cut both widths for the ceiling out at one time. That way the recessed end of the drywall will end up in the field in the ceiling. After you cut your width, cut the length. Same thing, chalk line, score the front, snap it, score the back, and it's cut. And I like to label every piece I can along the way. It makes the job a lot easier. Now, lay your first piece down on a nice flat surface. Then, find that reference point, that same corner that you made all your measurements from earlier, double check it, and then make all those marks from those measurements. Then draw lines from mark to mark. And then, this will eventually give you a box that you can go by of where the cans are going to fall. After you have the box, go from corner to corner to get your center. Then grab an old pair of calipers or a drawing compass if you have one, whatever it takes to make that circle from the inside of that box. Do that on both sides. Now with your drywall saw, go ahead and give yourself a nice clean cut around that circle. Notice you can do this with the drywall on its side, or you can lay it down on the edge of the bench and cut it out as well. And the drywall saw also acts as a nice cleanup for any imperfections. Okay, let's take a look at our second piece of drywall. We're going to do this the same way. We're going to find that reference point, that corner that we made all of our measurements from, transfer those measurements to this piece of drywall. Take your time and make sure that you make all the correct measurements. Now that you have those measurements, go ahead and draw a straight line across from mark to mark. Then you have your box. Go ahead and X out your box to find your center. Then grab your calipers and go ahead and scribe the circle within that box. Go ahead and do that to both sides. And it seems to me that this piece of drywall was easier to cut with it laying on the edge of the bench. Now we need one more small piece on that one wall. So again, all you got to do is make your mark, score it, snap it, cut the back, and then we got to make another little mark, make our line, score it, snap it, cut the back, and now we're ready for an install. For the drywall installation, I like to use 1 5/8" drywall screws with a drill motor. You want to go ahead and just sink those drywall screws just below the surface, not breaking the paper. And when you put your drywall in, for the ceiling especially, make sure you have your joists already marked so it's easier to find where you're screwing into. Put as many screws in the drywall as it takes to make it solid. Same thing with the other side. Go ahead and make your marks where the joists are, stick your piece up, grab your drill motor, and go ahead and start putting some screws in where the joists are. Put as many screws in as you have to make it safe. And again, try not to poke through the paper of the drywall when you put your screws in. With our spackle application, we'll use a 6-inch spackle blade, a corner spackle blade, a 10-inch spackle blade, and a spackle pan. Let's get started with our 6-inch blade. For our first coat, we're going to use fast drying 20-minute spackle. Grab yourself a bucket and go ahead and mix the 20-minute spackle with some water. What you want to do is mix it up to where you have a nice, even, thick consistency that you can apply to your walls and corners. But remember, it will dry in 20 minutes. So go ahead and mix and use as much as you can in 20 minutes. Go ahead and apply a generous amount into the corners. Then come back with your spackle tape, wet it, and put it into the corner, and then use your corner blade to smooth it out. Then your 6-inch blade to feather out from the corner to the wall. And remember, you always want to go ahead and leave as least amount of spackle on the ceiling and walls with your first coat. When using spackle and tape on your ceiling or wall, make sure that you go ahead and tape every seam, it being either a corner or flat surface. Otherwise, it'll crack later on. Again, with your spackle, go ahead and load up the corner. You want to put enough spackle up there so when you put your tape on, there's spackle behind every part of the tape. I've always been a big fan of wetting my tape before you put it on a spackle. It does two things. Number one, it adheres a lot easier to the spackle, and number two, it alleviates bubbles that might occur if you were to use dry tape. After your tape is up, use your corner blade to smooth it out. Then grab your 6-inch blade and feather from the corner to the wall and ceiling, making it nice and smooth. When spackling a flat surface, it's the same idea. Go ahead and load up spackle on both sides at the seam, get your tape, wet it, put it up, and then smooth it out with your 6-inch blade. Notice I have that recessed side of the drywall meeting the existing ceiling. That'll help with a seamless transition when we're done. Every time I do custom work, I find that it takes a little while to catch a nice steady workflow. You have to get used to your work environment, your tools and materials for the day, which can always change. Once you establish the process a few times, you'll find yourself getting more production value. This second section definitely went a lot quicker. I was able to go ahead with one mix of spackle all the seams and the corners, put my tape up, and smooth it out all within 20 minutes. The trick to your first, second, or third coat of spackle, in my opinion, is leaving as least amount of spackle on the wall and ceiling as possible. Well, there you have it, our first coat of spackle on all the screw holes, seams, and corners. Now that we taped our seams and our corners with the 20-minute spackle, we're ready for our next step. Now, instead of sanding, I like to go back with a wet sponge and a nice sharp 10-inch spackle blade. What you want to do is just kind of like hit the high ends of where the spackle is sticking up, sand it down a little bit with your sponge, wet sponge, which makes no dust, and then you're ready for your next coat. Now we're going to use our taping and topping spackle, which is perfect for your second and third coat. Whenever you work with your container of spackle, always make sure it's got an airtight seal when not using it. Now with your taping and topping spackle and your 10-inch blade, go ahead and feather out all those seams and corners. And remember, less is best. Just put enough spackle up there to feather out and flatten out all of your areas. We try to avoid as much sanding as possible. We're now ready for our third and final coat of spackle. Again, I'm going to cheat and use a wet sponge and a 10-inch spackle blade and kind of go ahead and hit the high ends, smooth it out, then come back with another final coat of spackle, and then after that dries, then I'll hit it with a real light sand. And then we're ready for paint. I usually start with the ceiling and work my way down. It seems to be a lot easier that way. Your third coat of spackle usually takes care of most imperfections in the wall and ceiling. Give it a light sand and you're ready for a primer coat. After your primer coat, more imperfections might stick out. Then go ahead and touch them up with some more spackle. Okay, let's see what we got here. Here's a little post-it note to make some marks. So what we're going to do is measure the first length of our wall to wall, and that's going to be 95 and 13/16. Go ahead and write that on there, 95, 13/16. So the next length is going to be 42 inches. Let's go ahead and write that down, take it downstairs, and cut out some crown molding. When cutting your crown molding, I find it easier to go ahead and turn your piece upside down on your miter box. Make sure you label where the top is, and go ahead and do whatever you have to do on your saw. Make a mark here or there, and double check that you have a nice square cut so your angle looks good. When installing your crown molding, make sure you have some good reference points to nail it up. Use a hammer and nail or a nail gun, whatever's easier for you. Now we're ready for some painting. As they say, a little caulk, spackle, and paint, everything a carpenter ain't. Thanks for joining us and have a great day.